How's everybody doing today? Wonderful. Thank you all so much for coming. I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming out and supporting this really, really important event. Takes about 90 volunteers to put this together. So thank you to all the volunteers and to all of our honored guests here today. We have the Gold Star Moms, Mr. Lambert, we have HAV, and Honoring Americans Heroes. So thank you so much to all our honored guests for coming. And so now to kick it off, ladies and gentlemen, can I ask everyone to please rise for the presentation of colors, and please remain standing for the singing of the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please be seated. Again, thank you all for being here today. This year's Memorial Day tribute is really a very special one to us. Aside from being our 15th year honoring military service members who made the ultimate sacrifice, we also dedicate this tribute to one of our own who we lost this year. Christine Martinez was a leader and a servant of good. She was devout in her faith, in her support of military and veteran community, and in the many wonderful things she did for our university. She was always an integral part of this event, and her presence is truly missed this year. We honor Christine's memory by continuing to serve the military and veteran community that she held so dear. For the last 15 years, the purpose of this event remains unchanged. 90+ volunteers come out together to reinforce the importance and the true meaning of Memorial Day. We do this to honor all of the men and women who lost their lives in service to this country. Our message this year is courage, legacy, and gratitude. We honor the courage of those who made the ultimate sacrifice and what their service embodied. We honor their legacy that they leave behind. And we remember them on this day with gratitude. So we're very honored today to have a guest speaker, and I'd like to introduce Mr. Frank Lambert. He's a West Point graduate in 1964. He went to Airborne Ranger School, served 2nd Battalion, 30th Marines in Germany, served in Vietnam from 1967 to 68. He earned his master's degree from University of Illinois. He wrapped up his military career at West Point Admissions Office, 1970 to 73. And after owning and managing several businesses, he finished out and settled into a long-term career as a financial advisor. For his military service, he was awarded a Silver Star, Soldier's Medal, 3 Bronze Stars, V for Valor, Air Medal, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Combat Infantry Badge. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the stage to Mr. Frank Lambert.
Thank you, Eric. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's wonderful that we all gather here on this important day to remember those who gave their life. And I hope we never forget, because I think that's very important for us as a country. For me, it's the most important holiday of the year, and I hope at the end of my presentation that you'll understand why I feel that way. What I thought would be of interest to you, I had many combat experiences in Vietnam in 1968. I thought I would share with you April 25th, 1968, which I call the scariest day of my life. I was sure that I was going to be killed or captured that day. And so I thought that you might be interested to hear about it. But before we get to that, I think because it's getting farther and farther in the distance of history, the year 1968 is probably a year that many of you might not remember, maybe not even born, it looks like. But 1968, first of all, socially in the United States was very tumultuous, as you may recall. Martin Luther King was killed in April, and Robert F. Kennedy was killed in June. But probably the most significant issue of 1968, which caused so much social turmoil, was the draft. If you talk to a young person today about being drafted in the military, they look at you with their eyes glazed over because it doesn't even bear any resemblance to their existence today. But back in those days, from age 18 to 25, you were eligible to be drafted. And to make matters even more frustrating was that it was done on a lottery basis. So every year your draft number could be different. And you never had a really good chance to plan ahead. And it became so tumultuous that we had protests all over the country. We had these protests today. Well, the protests back in those days were against the Vietnam War and the military. We even had a number of young men go to Canada. They deserted to Canada to avoid the draft and planned to live there the rest of their lives until Jimmy Carter granted them amnesty. But we had that kind of polarization in our country. So what was it like that was causing all of this polarization? And of course, it was the Vietnam War. 1968 was the most tumultuous year of the war. We had the most casualties in the war. Almost 16,000 Americans were killed in 1968. And in the month of May, we had over 1,500 killed. There were 64 killed on the day that I was wounded. And to give you an idea of how it affected us on the ground, I started my infantry company in January, didn't realize the Tet Offensive was breaking out simultaneously and that I was in for a pretty rough ride for 4 months. But I had 3 second lieutenant platoon leaders. I had a first lieutenant executive officer, and I had 130 men. 4 months later, when I was wounded on April 25th, I had 1 first lieutenant It was a different first lieutenant than I had in January, and I had 40 men left, which meant that my company was basically not operational, and it was going to take weeks to get enough replacements in to make us able to conduct a mission. But what was causing all of this? Well, there was a thing called the Tet Offensive. The American media reported this as a major military achievement, which in a way it really was, because the North Vietnamese army came down the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos and Cambodia and infiltrated into South Vietnam, simultaneously attacking many of the major cities and installations. And they did this amazingly, relatively undetected, and they had no aircraft. They did it all on foot and small vehicles. And at the time, because Tet was such an important religious holiday, many of the South Vietnamese army soldiers were home celebrating the holiday with their families, much as we do with Easter and Christmas here. And so General Giap, the commanding general of the North Vietnamese army, figured the security levels would be lower, and that's why he did the Tet Offensive invasion of South Vietnam. And while the American media called it a major military achievement, they also call it a major military victory. And that's where they got it wrong. Because in his post-World War Vietnam memoirs, General Giap said that in 1968, he was so concerned that he was not going to be able to keep his army sustained on the battlefield. They were being eaten up by the American military on the battlefield. Some reports say that they had, in 4 months, 60,000 killed and 100,000 wounded. And he was not going to be able to sustain his army long enough, because he felt that they would eventually win at the negotiating table, which they did in 1975 and took over all of South Vietnam. But in the spring of 68, he ordered a strategic withdrawal because he had to preserve his military and ordered them into the sanctuary countries of Laos and Cambodia. Yes, sanctuary existed even back then, because we could chase them into Laos and Cambodia. They could shoot at us, but we couldn't go across the border after them. So they got into Cambodia and Laos and saved themselves. So that brings us to the event that I would like to share with you. On April 19th, in an effort to chase them out of South Vietnam, kill or capture or chase them out, we conducted an air assault into what's called the A Shau Valley. And the A Shau Valley was a huge valley running north and south, a few miles east of the Laotian border, through which the North Vietnamese army conducted a lot of logistics operations. I'm told that that air assault with over 400 helicopters was the largest air assault since World War II on D-Day. These 400 helicopters were going back and forth, shuttling men out into the A Shau Valley. We lost 23 helicopters that day with the crew and the men on board. So it wasn't a great day. Eventually, however, when I got my company on the ground, I had no casualties. We moved them up this trail, and the mission I was given was to secure this trail coming out of the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. We're about a mile from the border. We had a documentary produced on us in 2011, and if you saw the terrain that we were confronted with, you could see that once I secured the trail with my company, the enemy wasn't going to use it. The terrain was so steep on both sides. So I was pretty content that I had accomplished my mission, but we didn't have any contact with the enemy on the ground. Ironically, we had a lot of contact flying in, but once we got on the ground, we had no contact. So I sent a patrol up the trail, and about 300 yards up the trail, they ran into the enemy, got into a firefight, and I pulled them back. No injuries. But now we knew where the enemy was, and they knew where we were, and they knew that they weren't going to be able to get through the trail for any reason at all. So I was pretty content just to stay put. However, on the 24th of April, our battalion commander came out, and I had the craziest conversation with a superior officer I think I've ever had. I was furious because he wanted me to run a patrol up and take out the enemy. And I argued with him, and I never done this before. He was a lieutenant colonel. And I said, it makes no sense. We've accomplished our mission. The enemy can't get by us. And look at the terrain. I don't know how we can get to the enemy position without being observed or have a lot of casualties. I said, it's a suicidal mission, and I won't do it. Well, after realizing that I wasn't going to change my position, he stood me up and he said, Captain Lambert, that's a direct order. You run that patrol tomorrow, April 25th. And he left. Well, I fully intended to disobey his order. I was not going to run that patrol. And I knew what would happen. I'd get relieved of my command, and he would appoint Lieutenant Barber, who was a platoon leader, whose platoon was the next one that had to run the next mission to run the patrol. So I knew the patrol was going to go anyway. And then I saw Lieutenant Barber briefing the platoon, and I knew I had a problem. The men in the platoon were all young men, 19, 20, 21 years of age, but they'd been with me since I took command from January. We had many, many firefights. They were really experienced and they were really good, and I would trust my life to them. And I think they felt the same way. But Lieutenant Barber was a brand new replacement, second lieutenant. He came out to us after the air assault, had no combat experience. His uniform was still clean. His boots were still shined. And the men were expected to follow him on what everybody knew was going to be the most dangerous mission of the time that I was in command. So I made the faithful decision. I couldn't let this happen. I took over the patrol. I told Lieutenant Barber, you just come with me, I'll run the patrol. Right away, by doing that, I violated, for those of you who have been in the military, the basic leadership rules for a company commander. You never take a patrol or a mission with less than half of your unit, which for me would be 2 platoons or about 60 men. And here I was going to go on a mission with 1 platoon and about 23 men. But I didn't feel I had a choice. So I took over the patrol. So the next morning, April 25th at 8:30, we started. We had to go up the side of the mountain into the jungle. And the plan was to go parallel to the trail, some 300 yards, come in behind where the enemy was. We still had no idea if the enemy was still there. Come in behind the enemy position and engage him if he was still there. To give you an idea of the terrain that we had to confront, think about how long it would take you to walk 300 yards. 3 football fields. 15, 20 minutes if you're lollygagging. Right? Took us 8.5 hours. 8.5 hours of slogging through the jungle. And for those of you in Iraq and Afghanistan, I know this is hard to believe, but we had no GPS. All I had was a map, which was worthless, when as far as you could see in the jungle was your face, and your hand in front of your face, and a compass. And amazingly, after 8.5 hours, it's now about 5 o'clock, our point man called me forward, and we reached the edge of the jungle, and we knew the enemy at least had been in that area because the jungle was defoliated. It was like a desert, the bomb craters all over the place. So we actually came within about 30 or 40 feet of where we wanted to come, navigating with a compass. We're eerily quiet. The birds weren't making any noise. There were no animals moving around. And we were whispering, and we were squatted at the edge of this opening, trying to figure out what to do next. And I was really concerned because it was now 5 o'clock. The sun was going to go down in an hour. And I did not like the idea of being 300 yards away from the rest of my company in the jungle and not know where the enemy was. So I whispered for Lieutenant Barber to come over. We're squatted down there. And I said, here's what we're going to do. And we got to do it quickly. You take half the unit, go to the left of this mound in front of us. I'm going to take the other half. I'm going to go through the bomb crater to the high ground. And assuming the trail that we wanted to get on is on the other side of this mound, we'll link up on the trail and secure the area. And the trail was there. We were right where we wanted to be. So I'm squatted there waiting for Lieutenant Barber to move out, and I'm watching him move out. So let me stop here for a second, because over the years, I've been asked many, many times, what is it like in real combat when the enemy is 20 or 30 feet away, throwing grenades at you, machine gunning you, you are doing the same to him. And I've tried to explain the terror and the emotion of it, and I don't think I've ever done a good job. And then I saw the movie Saving Private Ryan. Has anybody seen that movie? Well, if you remember in the first 15 minutes of Saving Private Ryan, there was no dialogue, right? All they were doing, they was landing on the beach, and Tom Hanks was the captain. And the noise of the bombs going off and the grenades going off and the screaming and yelling and the tension and the emotion was sky high. In fact, it was so realistic. I looked at the audience in the theater and people in the audience were flinching. It was that realistic. And on the way home, I told my wife, I said, you know, in the future, if I ever get the opportunity to share it with my audience, I'm going to refer to that movie as the most realistic depiction of combat that I've ever seen. Because as Lieutenant Barber was moving out to the left, we were about to have our Saving Private Ryan moment, because an arm came out with a pistol and killed Lieutenant Barber instantly. We didn't realize that this mound was the backside of an enemy bunker, and there were a whole bunch of enemy inside the mound. And when they shot Lieutenant Barber, it must have been the signal, because all of a sudden we had small arms fire coming in on us, seemingly from everywhere. They told us later, in fact, in here it says we were surrounded. I'm not sure we were, but it seemed that way. And we just started firing randomly to try to suppress the fire. Men were dropping all around me. We couldn't see where it was coming from. We were just firing randomly. And I didn't feel we had any choice, because I looked up in the air and the sky was full of grenades. The enemy was just lobbing grenades over the back of the bunker because they knew we were back there. And I knew if any of the grenades fell short, we were in deep trouble. So I screamed, "Follow me," good old John Wayne, company commander leader. And I know nobody heard me because of the noise, but I knew they would follow me. And so I took off through the bomb crater. And as I came up the other side, I didn't realize I was running right at an enemy rifleman. He was watching me the whole time. And as I came out of the bomb crater, he shot me. Now, he should have hit me in the head or in the chest, but he was a little slow on the trigger, thank goodness. And he shot me in the right leg, broke my leg, knocked me down. My instinct was immediately to crawl for cover. So I started crawling for cover. And it kind of weird is I thought, you know, nothing hurts. I guess I was so hyper that I didn't feel any pain. And about the time that thought went through my brain, my world blew up on me. And I was told later that I was hit by a grenade. And all of a sudden, literally the only thing I had on was my flak jacket and my boots. My pants were shredded completely off. My helmet was gone. My rifle was gone. I have no idea. And that really hurt. I was bleeding profusely out of my buttocks. I was just blood all over the place. My medic came up, Doc McBride, shot me with morphine. And just as he pulled the needle out, he disappeared. And I looked over my shoulder, and apparently that same rifleman, I don't know whether he was trying to hit me or Doc McBride, but he hit Doc McBride in the hip, blew him down in the bomb crater, and he's up against the edge of the bomb crater, screaming in pain. He survived and was interviewed. And in the documentary, he was saying at that point in time, the pain was so horrific that he wished he was dead. You think about it, 19-year-old kid, conscientious objector, but it didn't matter. He was still drafted. And he wasn't an infantryman with a rifle and a helmet and everything. He was a medic. So instead of giving him a rifle, we gave him a first aid kit. So he was running around the battlefield trying to help his fellow soldiers. Very brave young man. At any rate, I must have passed out, because the next thing I remember, it was deathly quiet. And it was probably around 9 or 10 o'clock at night, pitch black. You couldn't see the hand in front of your face. No noise, nothing was going on. All you could hear was your heartbeat pounding. Really, really scary. And I knew that come sunrise, we were in deep trouble. All of a sudden, down the trail, a grenade goes off, pistol fire and screaming and yelling. Had no idea. And then it got deathly quiet again. And over the next couple of hours, this happened a couple more times, with the last time about 40 feet away. And I didn't know what was happening. Was the enemy coming up the trail and killing those of my men who got caught on the trail? Or please God, let it be a rescue mission from the rear, and my men were coming up to rescue us? Had no idea. We got our weapons all ready to go. We were sure we were going to be attacked. And all of a sudden, a face appeared 2 feet in front of me. "You guys all right?" I almost had a heart attack. I couldn't believe it. It was my executive officer, Mike Sprayberry, and he had led a group of volunteers up to rescue us. Well, long story short, it took the rest of the night to get us off the mountain. And in the documentary, Mike is interviewed as saying, if we didn't get everybody off the mountain by daylight, we were all dead because the enemy was still all around the area. So let me fast forward a little bit, because obviously I survived. I was evacuated to a MASH hospital in Vietnam, then to the Philippines, and then to Japan. And after a couple of surgeries in Japan, I was evacuated to Fort Dix Hospital in New Jersey, went on rehab for 3 months, then was stationed at Fort Knox, Kentucky for an advanced officer's course, and then eventually to the University of Illinois to get my graduate's degree. And there in October of 1969, I'm watching the evening news, and I see where President Nixon is about to conduct a military award ceremony. I thought I'd pay attention, see what's going on. And as I'm reading the citation, all of a sudden I realized they're talking about us. April 25th, 1968, 18 months before, I had no contact with anybody during that time. And so I perked up and started paying attention. And that's when I realized that Mike Sperryberry, my executive officer, was getting the Medal of Honor. Turns out the trail was so narrow that even though he had a patrol of volunteers, it was really a patrol of one. He would crawl up the trail, literally under an enemy bunker, throw a grenade in, and kill the enemy. It turned out he killed 12 of the enemy to get to us, who would have been there in the morning had he not done this. But then, after being unbelievably heroic and brave, and I was just relishing what he did for us, there's always the rest of the story, isn't there? And unfortunately, there is a rest of the story. We had 11 men wounded that day, myself included, and we had 4 men killed, including Lieutenant Barber. And 3 of those men were not recovered. Hubert Guillory from New Orleans, age 20, Dan Kelly, age 20 from Boston, and David Scott, age 20 from Chicago. And to make matters worse, a couple of days later, we had a helicopter come out, one of these light observation helicopters with a 3-man crew. And they said, you know, your guys might be just lost. They got separated and they're trying to get back. So we'll go out and get them for you. And they went out into the area. They were shot down. They were all killed, and their bodies were never recovered. So I wonder what that colonel thought. Never saw him again. He sent us on this suicidal mission, 11 men wounded, 7 men killed, and 6 of the men are still lying on the floor of the jungle today, and we're never going to find them. The jungle is so overgrown. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is why Memorial Day is so important to me. God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lambert, for sharing your story with us. This year's theme spells out courage, legacy, and gratitude. I think that it's the perfect message to send us into Memorial Day. We celebrate our fallen heroes' courage. We honor their legacy and reflect on their sacrifice with gratitude. Share this message with your loved ones over the upcoming long weekend, and know that by living a life full of joy, connected to those that we love, you honor what our heroes served and gave their lives to protect. Thank you so much for coming to share this event with us again this year. And we'll conclude our ceremony today with the playing of taps. Thank you all for coming today. That concludes our ceremony.